apologies. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about zoning reform today. And I thought, so I was asking the general question yesterday, which Wendy went ahead and Googled for me, and we'll talk about the results of that later. But like, why is everybody reforming their zoning all of a sudden? And so most broadly, there seem to be a couple of reasons. One is a focus on equity that appears to be new, not that there was no focus on equity before, but the conversation appears to be new, and so is sort of excavating and daylighting in all industries new things to think about in that context. And then the other reason is much more evergreen economics. We have run into some real economic problems, particularly in the housing market, that have shined a light on zoning and its role in it. So I'm going to start kind of with the highest level in our profession view of the American Planning Association. So the APA published at the end of last year in October a draft equity in zoning policy guide. And we're going to talk about that in some detail. I'll start with this, like equity is not, I'm so pleased that we have two city managers on here today. I thought it would just be us planners talking to each other. So I'm just like really delighted to kind of not just talk amongst ourselves about this. So planners, right, we're not new to the equity conversation. So on top is like a line from the first section of our code of ethics, which if we're certified, we're beholden to, and if we're not certified, I hope it's at least, important to our mission, right, to incorporate equity principles and strategies as the foundation for preparing plans and implementation programs. So that's our charge. Underneath it is some text that I find myself returning to sort of explain that to myself in the most lay person's, in the most basic, like, what are we doing here terms, which is that planning involves redistribution by allocating public resources and facilities, including those that have negative externalities. So the issue of equity in planning is not a special case where redistribution matters, but it's an inescapable fact of what we do. So that comes from Dr. Carolyn Lowe of Wayne State University, who did an excellent analysis of master plans in the state of Michigan to ask if the evidence shows that we're sort of living up to this tenet of our code of ethics. The finding, spoiler alert, was we could sure be doing better. So that's very interesting. I would point you to that work if you are thinking about, how can I really incorporate this into the work that I do every day? In the meantime, this, equity is not outside of planning. Equity is foundational to planning. That really rang true to me. So what's in this equity and zoning policy guide? So again, the draft was distributed in October. I actually had a hard time finding it on the internet when I was preparing for this. I think they've taken it off their website to do the revisions. I expect it to be re-released later this year with some, yay, this is a new thing. So keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in the draft, I've snagged that copy from the dusty corner of the internet, and I'd be happy to share it with you. So why did APA say that they were doing this? Well, they said that they had produced a planning for equity policy guide in 2019, and since 2017 had put out, different policy guides focusing on particular pieces of planning, so hazard mitigation, housing, transportation, and health, all of which go through a policy lens. But, and they just say this right outright, plans are advisory, zoning's the law, and they're both under our purview. So the goal of this policy guide, as they say, is to identify the specific ways that we can change zoning to dismantle barriers that perpetuate the separation of historically disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. So there's our equity focus there, right? And I think this is important language. While acknowledging the importance of dramatic changes in plans and policies, the policy guide focuses on identifying and removing those often facially neutral zoning laws and regulations that perpetuate inequitable planning policy. So again, on the left here, what they're really saying is they are focusing on impact and not intent, right? Which we hear a lot about in equity circles. So this is how we planners can do that in one way. How is the policy guide organized? Well, there's probably a couple of dozen of the specific recommendations that they make, but they're focused into three different buckets. And those buckets are, first of all, like, the rules of zoning. What do they say? That seems pretty straightforward, right? You would expect to see that. The second is equity in the people of zoning, which I think we, again, as planners, we're the ones that are charged with gaining community engagement. It is important to us to understand how representative it is. So we get that. If you are not at the table, you're on the menu. The world is run by those who show up. That, like, all of these things that we know carry through to this policy also. So who is writing the zoning regulations matters. And then the third is equity in the map of zoning districts. So this acknowledges that even if you have, so harkening back to the first bucket, equity in the rules, the same things, you can have the same thing said, but that if they are applied in different contexts, in different areas of your community that are functioning in different ways, that have different resources, that have different ways of being, outcomes, limitations, those results are going to be different. So the third bucket is equity and how those rules are applied and in what contexts in the community. So that is kind of the broad level of what APA is saying about equity and zoning in general. And now I'm going to lean into a little bit of zoning and the housing shortage. That seems to be the hottest, most prevalent topic. And that's where we kind of shift away from the equity driver into the economics driver. Although the equity impacts in housing are some of the most dramatic. And so they're not separable. It's just that this seems to be a bit more driven by the economics. So I'll spend a couple of slides talking about those economics because they're terrible. They're just terrible right now, right? So construction rates have not returned to pre-Great Recession levels. We quit building houses in 2008, and we largely have not picked up the pace again. The industry is not the same. The people, that they're not the same number of companies. It's just not the same anymore. In Michigan, you might think, well, lucky for us, our population's pretty stagnant. We probably don't need that much housing, right? I think the planners among us know that household size, this sort of wonky fact that household size has been changing and getting smaller. Households, there are fewer people living in each structure, so we need more structures just to house the same amount of people. And we're not growing at all anymore. We are growing slowly. So again, that's even more housing units that are needed. So nationally, if we had been building at the same rate we were between 68 and 2000 over the last 20 years, we would have 5.5 million more housing units nationally than we do right now. It's a big number. It's hard to visualize. What does that look like in the state? MSHDA produced last year, it's 2023 now, a statewide housing plan that identifies specific housing needs in Michigan. That builds off some previous work that they had done, a needs assessment, I think the year before, and homeownership study in maybe 2018, 2019. So having done that work, this statewide housing plan says, okay, we're pretty confident this is what we need. We need 75,000 more new or rehabilitated housing units. And they are largely the ones that it's hard to get built, right? 39,000 units that are both affordable and rental. Those are two things that we know from our conversations are hard to get built. We do need 21,000 more market rate units. It's hard to get all housing built, but that's the easiest kind. We need more homeownership opportunities for low and moderate income households. That's going to influence the kind of housing we're building. Low and moderate income households are not going to be purchasing a 5,000 square foot home. So we need to think about that, and some additional workforce housing. In the interest of time, I won't go over the rest of them, but I will just say that the statewide house, that's just our part of it. That's just the new housing. There's also, the economic problem in the line underneath that, 100,000 households who need their housing stabilized. That's an economic problem, and it's an even bigger one. So I like this slide because it really shows us, these are building permits in Michigan. Okay, you can see the pattern, and then you can see that big white space on the right side of the screen, which is where those 75,000 units should be. You can just see, oh, this is how we got here. So to an extent, this is our supply problem. And because this graph shows us both single family in the red and multifamily in the green, it shows us a little bit of our choice problem. You can see that we used to build much more multifamily housing than we do right now. Right now, not only are we building much less housing altogether, but the proportion of it, which is single family detached, is much higher. So here's our choice problem. And here is our affordability problem. So the top line here shows housing costs, which up, and a little dip, up. And then the bottom is our wages. So I'll just acknowledge up front, we can't zone our way out of this. This problem is way bigger than zoning, but this is the piece of it that we have. I'd also like to acknowledge that we can't earn our way out of it. Like 40 years of flat wages is not something you or I can negotiate our way out of to keep up with housing costs. So the only thing I'll say about this is for those of us who are charged with health, safety, welfare, equity, and really caring about people in our communities, that gap is full of households that cannot, by their own efforts, make housing happen for themselves. And that is not necessarily a personal choice problem, as we can see, right? So for those of us in the public sector, that's worth remembering. Murph and I both like this slide because it it really shows how this problem is widely acknowledged from both sides of the political spectrum. In this day and age, it does not feel like you hear a lot of agreement across the board, period, on much, but the zoning that governs housing on the left, it's inequitable. It hurts affordability, it's exclusionary, it fuels gentrification, it limits choice and access to opportunity, and it's a tool for segregation. On the right, it's a market failure. It increases costs, it limits production, it limits your choice, it's outdated and inefficient, it's full of bureaucracy, and it distorts the market. And I think we would agree that all those things are true. Great, right? Okay, finally, we all agree on something. We are definitely going to get things done. We are getting some things done. So on this slide is some state level reform. So red state take on a YIMBY housing bill that was in Utah. That was a couple of years ago. This year, their neighbor Colorado, which is sort of much more purple, but that's got some red in it, passed some pretty comprehensive statewide housing reform. That YouTube video is the White House talking about zoning for housing. And then the remaining two there are from Oregon and Connecticut. So, again, pretty lefty, who have also instituted some statewide zoning reforms, which we call at the local level preemption, right? I mean, that's another name for a statewide zoning reform on a local issue. Why is this happening at the state level? Because it's so hard at the local level. So this is what Wendy and I found yesterday when she Googled, why is everybody talking about zoning reform all of a sudden? So on the left, we have this chart by Vox, which, they can be a little lefty, Matthew Iglesias. And so the thrust of that article was, listen, we need to reform zoning for equity reasons, but also for economic reasons. And if you're just going to create a problem when you talk about equity reasons, which you are, look at this chart here, then lean on the economic one. So that's one thrust there. And then we look over on the right and we see this Community Journal article that says, okay, well, you can talk about the economics of housing reform, and that through their finding, nationally representative survey, urban and suburban Americans, we find that most people simply don't believe that increasing housing supply would lower prices. And these folks didn't believe that study, so they went back and they asked people again. They were like, okay, well, do you understand basic economics? And they said, yes, we understand it in a variety of other contexts. We do not believe that it applies to housing. Well, we're in a little bind here. Okay, I have no solutions for this. I am just acknowledging the bind that we're in. And I'm going to present, this is the world premiere of this particular slide, which is going to show up in our upcoming housing season, housing series, and a presentation called Stand By Your Plan. Why it's so hard, even when you have a good plan and good zoning, to get that development all the way through. This is from Michigan State's excellent redlining website. Most of us have seen the maps. Most of us have seen the maps overlaying with the current racial makeup of neighborhoods, and that is excellent information. What I spent some time with this time is reading the words, which I think I had not done before. And what that did was really reinforce to me, this is the birth of our national housing policy. This is the beginning of it. And in the beginning of it, we were not shy at all about talking about who lives in homes and determining economic value based on who lives in homes. I say at the bottom, massive organizational principles and buildings both last a long time. We're not allowed to do that anymore, but I don't know that we have gone through the process of really making that change and uprooting what was at the birth of our national housing policy and transforming it into what we want it to be today, because I think that the majority of us do wish that it were much more equitable than in fact it is. So again, I have no answers for this, but what I am trying to do is to get at I find this to be such cognitive dissonance, right? You can have every single argument and just get no, 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 no. And I'd find it helpful to understand why a little bit. This helps a little bit. Again, I don't know what the answer is. The answer is we're all moving forward together. Okay, now that I've about used up my time, I'll go over the toolkit. But I do want to be brief about this because honestly, it's available on the website. It's good stuff. You'll get more from diving into it than you will from sort of me walking through it. So I'm just going to kind of high level the ideas behind it, which I hope connect to the things that I've just been talking about. So these are in 3 basic buckets too. Those buckets are first, changes to the districts themselves. So the paradigm shifts that these tools, collapsing the districts, rezoning for mixed use and multifamily, expanding allowable uses, and using performance standards, those represent some paradigm shifts from the way we've been doing business. The reason for that is that if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always gotten, and we just decided that doesn't work. So, but a one size fits all approach is not going to work either. Like we cannot at math or at ML, we can't be like, well, this is the thing you need to do now, because again, part of the problem is the uniformity. The fix that needs to be made is more careful and targeted zoning, not everybody do a different thing now. The separation of uses, we've been moving away from it a little bit, and I think probably we need to continue to, right? Commercial districts can contain residential uses. They're good places for some kinds of residential uses. They help to reduce transportation burdens. If the only problem is like this thinking, then maybe we need to think about the thinking. And this is another paradigm shift is that this is every community's problem. So 75,000 housing units, 1,700 local units of government. Every single unit of government needs 44 more housing units if we were to distribute it uniformly, which we're not. But if we were, I mean, that's sort of the scale of the issue. This is every community's issue to tackle right now. And we'll emphasize this twice, that not everything has to happen in the zoning districts. Performance standards, and then later we'll talk about another way to sort of fine tune that blood tool. Form and context, again, we need smaller things if they are going to be more affordable. We need to get out of the idea that every home in a neighborhood has to be the exact same size. We will never get to economic integration that way. And in fact, that's a tool for preventing it. It's actually not our responsibility to guarantee free and convenient parking for everybody. This is true in residences as well as in our commercial districts. Missing middle housing, it has to happen. And design is more important than density. I think that's what the form-based code folks have been trying to tell us for quite some time. That you can have a comfortable small space if it's well designed. And you can also have an uncomfortable large space that's poorly designed. And that expanding housing types expands choice and opportunity. We have not so much been focusing on that plus. And then finally, the last bucket is processes. So the paradigm shifts there are to codify what you want rather than to use negotiation as a tool that saves time, it increases transparency, and it increases predictability, which are all things that really we want. Feels like giving up power, it's just shifting it. So that, we're recommending take that from both ends. So administrative approvals for things that are by right, that's right in our enabling legislation. If it meets the standards, we shall approve it. It doesn't require a body to do that. That is actually the definition of an administrative task, right? And then from the other side, if you don't need political involvement, say you don't need to change the zone, then you don't need city council's involvement. That is the definition of why an appointed body exists, right? Making peace with nonconformities and finding ways to make them work. Buildings last longer than our idea of the neighborhood sometimes. So it's just a building. If we can find a way to make it work and to fit into our new context, then that is the cheaper and more accessible option. And finally, again, zoning doesn't need to regulate everything. Performance standards and here police power ordinances for nuisances can do some of the heavy lifting for us. And now I hope this will be a good transition over to Murph, who talks about some things besides residential zoning reform. I don't think this will be the end of it, right? We've been talking about environmental justice and industry in terms of zoning regulations for a long time. Hopefully with the new focus on equity, that continues to make significant strides. The renewable energy facilities, those need accommodation both personally and at a commercial scale. Equitable distribution of community investments, codifying processes that help counter or this over participation of a particular section of the community that is overrepresented in our community engagement. And then finally, commercial districts that support the disadvantaged residential districts, because again, they come together, right? So if we have been treating certain areas of our certain residential areas very poorly, it makes an awful lot of sense that they have commercial areas that support them that also need help and redress. So I'm going to stop my share there, and you're welcome to ask questions or just charge on with Murph.
Any questions for Leah before Murph starts up? All right, well, jot them down, save them for later. They'll both be available.
That's right.
Okay, Murph?
All right, screen share here. Okay, hopefully that works. Ta-da. So, yeah, Leah did in fact queue up well that, yeah, I think equity is about not just the, like, what's the outcome? How affordable is the housing? How many units of affordable housing do we have? But as Leah said, it's also who's involved in that process of what housing do we need? What are the rules that we set to get that housing, and who has the agency to make some of those decisions? Yeah, looking at my slide title here, one of the things I'm intending is we want to talk about code reform in a way that broadens participation and that makes it available as a tool and a process that people can engage in, not just in an Ann Arbor or Grand Rapids, but in a Litchfield or a Springfield, where, as Vester and Jason were saying, they wear 16 hats because they probably got only a handful of staff in City Hall to work with. So how do we make sure that those communities as well can access code reform strategies? But also from a equity standpoint, it's what is the increment of development look like that in Ann Arbor or Grand Rapids or Detroit, it might make sense to think about housing developments, 100 homes at a time in a big 5-story building or what have you, in Litchfield or Springfield, or in my neighborhood here in Ypsilanti, or in the outlying neighborhoods of Detroit or Grand Rapids even. Development might look like a single infill parcel on someone's block that they look at and say, I'm handy, I know numbers, I want to try to do something on that lot there. How do we make the development process accessible to just folks in the neighborhood who want to participate in the creation of their neighborhood, of their place, of their community? How do we shrink the development process scale to the point where it is feasible for the average citizen to participate in development? So that's what I mean when I say making it easier, is both making it easier for the city to get to the point where they're supporting this good development that supports placemaking, that supports the neighborhood, that supports housing choice, but also making it easier for everyone to participate in that process of developing the places they live, and also in enjoying the economic benefits of the real estate development process. So I think probably most of you are familiar at least a little bit with the League. We are the membership organization of city and village governments around the state of Michigan, 530 some municipal governments, which does include the large urban cities, but a long tail of small places. Our median member is a community of about 1,900 people. I think it was Leslie last I looked. And our average member, even with those few big cities involved, is about 10,000 people. So when we're thinking about who does this work for, we spend a lot of time thinking about that community in the range of like 1,000 to 10,000 people rather than the big places. So the labs team here at the League is saying, okay, Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, Detroit, they are unique places with honestly a lot of staff capacity and resources that they can direct to particular needs planning wise. they're not the audience that needs our help. We're looking at those 300 smaller communities out there that maybe don't have a staff planner, don't have the resources to bring in a consultant to overhaul the zoning ordinance, still need access to those tools because their zoning ordinances are still 40 or 50 years old in a lot of cases and getting in the way of good development. So yeah, zoning is one case of things that the labs team says we have great practices for doing a form-based code at the scale of a neighborhood or a citywide plan. But we know that a lot of our communities just don't have the resources or capacity to engage in some of those really good best practices that we've developed. How do we learn from those and systematize the individual parts so that they can scale down and scale broadly to a lot of communities and a lot of places? So again, we know a lot of our communities have old zoning codes that often date to the 50s or 60s or 70s, at least in part. It was the old zoning by Xerox effect, where you say, oh, we need a zoning ordinance. Our neighbor has a zoning ordinance. We'll just copy theirs and like change some things. And it's probably good enough for us if it's good enough for them. I think we still see that happen today where people say, well, we need to change our sign code or our landscaping standards. Let's just look at a peer community and copy whatever they have. So this isn't necessarily a way to get new practices into effect or to change development patterns. And there's a quote from Peter Allen, who taught the real estate development courses at U of M. Communities can make the best plans in the world, but it's developers who implement the plans, but then the codes get in the way of implementing the plans and realizing the community goals, or the developers doing the development that in a lot of cases they really do want to. This slide is from a presentation from when my kids were hitting Frozen 2 on a weekly basis. So here's Anna trapped in the cave, wondering if how she's ever going to overhaul her zoning ordinance. It's just too big a lift. And what she realizes is that she doesn't have to fix the whole zoning ordinance all at once. She just needs to fix the next right thing in her ordinance to make it better. So the project for code reform was a collaborative effort by the League and the Congress for the New Urbanism at the national level, as well as AARP and MEDC. We had various folks from MAP's membership involved as well to help make sure we were looking at the local context properly to say, okay, why is it that we've had form-based codes, we've had the SMART code for 30 years at this point, and so few communities across the country are using these new paradigms? Well, it's because our average community is not Ann Arbor or Grand Rapids, it's Litchfield or Springfield, and they don't have access to a full form-based code by DPZ or whatever. We need to give them solutions that are scaled to their resources, to their needs, and to their communities, rather than two big solutions for two big communities. We just need to figure out what those solutions are and to give them permission to say, you don't have to fix everything at once. It's not an all or nothing proposition. Codes are more living and organic things in practice than we might think. It's okay to just start with some small fixes if that's all the capacity you have to scratch those itches you have right now. And maybe that builds up momentum towards larger fixes, either continuing in an incremental process or eventually pulling together the political support and the resources to do a larger overhaul. So one of the communities that was along with us for this ride, Nolan, I think you're at Kalamazoo. So this was Christina Anderson and Rebecca Kick working with us. They were one of the guinea pigs that came in and talked to the CNU and League team and said, okay, we just have so many things that we want to do in our zoning ordinance. How do we do it all? Well, giving permission to start one neighborhood at a time and one topic at a time and work from there was one of the key things that we built into those two code reform guides that I showed. It's that process of saying, like, you can fix a few things at once. You can target a few places, fix the needs and move on to the next one, rather than letting all the problems sit there and fester until you can fix them all at once. So I worked with them to look at this neighborhood, the Edison neighborhood just south of downtown Kalamazoo, with a lot of like fine-grained historic homes mixed in with industrial and commercial uses. It was very much a historic working class neighborhood where the residents lived down the street from the plant or the logistics facility, and everything was all mixed up together. And the zoning ordinance in place for that neighborhood was put in place well after most of the development in that neighborhood, and had a much more suburban idea of what housing should look like. So most of the neighborhood was non-conforming. This maps out lot area and shows, something like half the parcels in that neighborhood non-conforming by lot area. We ran another map by lot width and showed that an additional good chunk of lots were non-conforming there. Layering in setbacks, and we estimated that something like 90% of homes and parcels in that neighborhood were non-conforming uses, or non-conforming lots, which, yes, the code had a provision to say, oh yeah, if it's an existing lot, under certain circumstances, you can still build a house on it, but it's that much more process for somebody to figure out, okay, how do I insure this? How do I finance this as a non-conforming lot? So we use this principle of the neighborhood works. People are engaged there. They have ownership over it. They care about it. There's a functioning neighborhood organization. We're attached to the neighborhood more than we're attached to the code. So let's fit the code to match the neighborhood, rather than trying to force the neighborhood to match this inappropriate code. And we can start doing that just with some small fixes. We can go through the zoning ordinance, and just by changing the minimum lot area and the minimum lot width in that neighborhood, suddenly we can render nearly every existing parcel in that neighborhood to be conforming. And now it's a lot easier for somebody to get a mortgage and get insurance on their home if they want to build a new home in that neighborhood. And we haven't actually changed anything about the neighborhood character on the ground. We've just said that what's there is good and it should continue. And this is a process that Kalamazoo staff went through with their neighborhood, and what looks on paper on the map to be this massive change where we're affecting hundreds of parcels in this neighborhood and effectively, in a very small way, upzoning them. When it came to the city commission for approval, the neighborhood representatives stood up and said, yep, we love this and we're happy to have worked with the community, with the staff on this. Nobody came out in protest. The North Side neighborhood as well, just on the other side of downtown, went through this process too. And commission said, great, we love it, we'll approve it. Some problems solved. Let's do the next ones. Anna has a question.
Yeah, so recently here in Sheboygan, we had the ZBA vote on a project involving Habitat for Humanity taking a non-conforming lot use. And of course, one of the things they brought up was parking. And there were a couple neighbors who showed up. And I was just curious how much time you spent before this came to the commission for them to vote on it, because that was something that the surrounding neighbors were like, we don't feel like we were given enough time or given enough information. So just when looking at this, could you like give a specific example of like materials you gave to the neighborhood or stuff like that?
So the neighborhood interface in this case was primarily by staff. I was doing more of the code review and mapping and whatnot on the back end. So yeah, it was a few months long process. They were doing it in parallel with neighborhood scale planning work. The city had done a citywide master plan a few years before and was going back and through their neighborhood activator staff role, working with individual neighborhoods to figure out, okay, what do these citywide goals look like at the neighborhood level? So they had an existing process in place that was a few months long discussion around neighborhood scale goals and needs and opportunities. So the zoning discussion was really rolled into that as an implementation step that could be adopted at the same time as the neighborhood plan. But I also see in your question the distinction between here's a particular case where people can really fixate on, oh, I'm surprised by this one example right here, and here we are at the ZBA breaking the rules for them when we have rules that people are supposed to follow. Where when we're looking at a code reform case, we're looking at let's get away from, oh, is it Habitat for Humanity or is it somebody else, or what do I like or dislike about this applicant or this site or whatnot, and looking at it in the more high level of like, what are the right rules for this neighborhood? Do we really need one parking space for every bedroom, or do we need one off-street parking space per dwelling unit, and anything beyond that is maybe up to the discretion of the developer, builder, resident, as long as we make sure that we're saying, hey, you can't park on the grass in the front yard as a police powers rule that Leah had mentioned as an alternative to zoning. I don't have like a solution on the engagement side to talk about so much as pieces like that of, hey, our ZBA has had a pattern of people having to come to us because they just can't fit the parking requirement on their site. Okay, maybe that's a one incremental thing that we want to fix in our neighborhood. And so what these two guides do is say, okay, what type of place are you working in? Is it a main street? Is it a traditional downtown? Is it a downtown adjacent neighborhood? Is it an aging commercial corridor? And then within that place provides sort of a prioritized list of here are types of problems and solutions that frequently occur in that type of place. Maybe you're thinking about building design, maybe you're thinking about lots and sort of neighborhood block patterns, maybe you're thinking about street frontage and streetscape, but we're going to give you prioritized lists of do these things first in a downtown adjacent neighborhood, then move on to these slightly harder next things, then keep on going down the list for as much appetite as you have, to really give that that permission to say, okay, we can just fix this one line here, so let's just fix that one line here. Jason has a question.
Yeah, thank you. In your arc of engagement, I know you had mentioned that you wanted to start small and kind of bite off exactly what you think you can chew. We're in the process of redoing our entire zoning code, all of our planning, everything. And I just finished the rewrite on it, but I feel like it's a huge bite for council to try to approve all at once. So I'm torn between starting them off with adjusting uses. I'll give you a specific example where one of our residential zones it doesn't allow for single family homes, but every single home in that zone is a single family home. So I want to bite that and address that right away, because there's people that are wanting to develop, and it's just we're clearing more hurdles than we need to for a single family home. But then I've also got other smaller things, like setbacks and stuff like that, that would make a lot of that stuff a lot easier as well. And I'm torn between starting with adjusting our uses versus adjusting some of the other smaller stuff that would clear a lot of those hurdles without adjusting uses. But I feel like the uses kind of go hand in hand. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
So that is kind of, as luck would have it, kind of what I was going to talk about on my next slide here is, like, if you have the resources and the capacity to do a cohesive rewrite, that's ultimately probably preferable if you can make sure that everything's working in concert and that all the pieces are working together. The incremental approach to code reform is not to say that that's better than really digging into everything as a cohesive system, but to give permission to say that you don't have to do the whole thing all at once if you're not able to. So in some cases, I've talked to communities, Hazel Park, for example, I'm talking to right now about they're starting the process of a zoning ordinance overhaul, but they also know that they're having a lot of garage dominated snout houses popping up in their neighborhoods right now. What are some code fixes that they can put in place like this month to say, well, we know we don't want the garage dominated facade, so stop doing that. We won't allow it anymore. But we're not going to wait a year or 2 years until we have the entire code rewritten and ready to go before we're going to put that immediate fix in place, just because we know it's such a priority now. So you can do the incremental in the process of building out that code. If you've already got basically the full rewrite ready to go, I think it's probably worth making the case for look, this is all meant to work as a system and it will work best as a whole system. And then if folks balk at that as too big a lift or too radical a shift, yeah, maybe saying, okay, well, if we can't get to yes on this right now, let's set aside that piece that's not working for us and maybe adopt some of these other pieces. Knowing that it's really meant to work all together, but if the piece we can do right now is these pieces and give everybody some comfort that, look, we made those changes, world didn't end, let's put in place the rest of it. I think that's valid as well, and I've seen a few communities do that, but I wouldn't encourage you to start by just pitching a piece of what you've got, knowing that you've already gone through the work and the engagement to put the whole thing together. That makes sense. So I will also say that segues into the other piece of my presentation, which is looking at that housing aspect in particular. The code reform guides are not limited to housing. They are in fact looking at pretty much the entire city except for a traditionally single family dominated neighborhood. When we were working on the code reform guides, we sort of set aside that place type as a site we didn't necessarily want to pick if we had lots of room to work elsewhere. But we also know that that housing question is huge, and most of our land area is those traditionally, or at least currently, single family dominated neighborhoods. And you've seen some of these stats from Leah out of the state housing plan. What can we do? Again, thinking of that small community and that small scale development, like one lot at a time in a neighborhood, and looking 100 years back in time as an inspiration for, okay, once upon a time, folks in the neighborhood could order a house out of a catalog from Sears or Aladdin or whatnot, and just build their own house on their lot, and then maybe buy the lot next door and build another one. Sears was doing basically flat pack houses where it would show up in train cars and you'd unload it at the station. Others were just selling the plans and sort of parts lists for what you would need to build these houses. But we have these houses built in communities all over the state, all over the region. Folks go out and like house hunt for Sears homes to catalog where they are. Here's one in Berkeley, Michigan, straight out of the catalog with some architectural variation. And you can see from the catalog page that this is a duplex. And walking down the street, you would never know that. It fits right into any single family neighborhood. And there were lots of these kit homes that were duplexes or threeplexes or fourplexes or flexible between different internal units. So let's revive that tradition. Melissa Milton-Pung, who's on my and Jada's team here in labs at the League, is an architectural preservationist by background. And so she leaned on some of her architects' connections to say, okay, what would it look like to provide new homes that are duplexes or fourplexes that respect Michigan architectural traditions, fit into these neighborhoods that everybody knows and loves, fit modern building codes, and really appeal to that aesthetic of the pre-war kit homes or whatnot. So we have produced two plans where the construction plan sets are nearly ready to go, 95% complete, free and downloadable from our website. I say 95% complete because if you're building this in Springfield, you have very different like frost line depth requirements for your footings than Marquette would. You have different snow load requirements for the roof trusses. So there's some of those fill in the blank to meet your local variable, but otherwise substantially complete. This design is called the Linden. It's a 2-home up-down duplex. And this one is called the Grove. It's a 4-home, 2 homes up, 2 homes down, 4-plex, with 1 unit entered from the street facing facade so that it has a front porch and a front door and meets those form-based requirements we like, as well as a side entrance that accesses all 4 units. So we're looking at floor plans that that fit within this model, that can provide all of the constraints we're looking at. That, importantly, we are looking at every home being on a single level so that all the first floor homes can be made accessible easily. And as I mentioned, we have construction plan sets for these that we are giving away. Please take them, remix them, do what you want with them. They are copyright free. Our architects have signed over all their rights to them, and we want people to use them and share back what they're doing with us. And we provide a couple of variations on them as far as facade materials, as far as some roofline frills that are easily added or subtracted. They are fairly basic in that we don't have garages or basements on them. They're crawl space and just the primary building. So we figured those other things can be added on by the user if they want. But also in our guide to using these, we're including some reference tables on if you are putting this on a 50-foot wide lot in your neighborhood. You can't have setback requirements that are greater than this, or else it won't fit. If your lot coverage requirement is smaller than this, then it won't fit. So kind of that cheat sheet for if you want this home in your neighborhood, and if you want to enable it, and you have lots of a certain size, here are the things you need to look at in your zoning ordinance to make sure that this actually fits. And in some communities, we're actually talking about taking this to the next step of, okay, maybe Hazel Park has their building official review these plans and say, yep, we are pre-approving these plans. If you come in with this construction plan set, we've already seen it. Your building permit is a checkbox because we've already reviewed it, and you can walk out of the building department with your permit on the spot. So I'll just end with links here, and probably Wendy could send out the PowerPoint and links as well. The code reform guides and the pattern homes guidebook and plan sets are all available for download, and you are certainly welcome to call me and talk about specific application or questions regarding your communities. And we are in the process of building out a couple more plan sets for more of a townhome format or a single story building pattern to fit in additional place types and fit additional housing needs. But this is kind of that level of let's think about what is the actual home that we need to get there. And then also when we're talking about code reform with communities, we can say, look at this home. Isn't it cute? Don't we want it in our neighborhoods? Great. Here's what we have to do to enable it. Oh, and by the way, it's a duplex. So kind of lead with the things that get people that appeal to people's aesthetics and their sense of what their neighborhood should look like, and then say, okay, what happens inside that house is a little bit less important than the actual design and lot placement and all of those form-based aspects of it. So
It's great.
I'll shut up.
Thanks, Murph. We have like just a couple minutes left if people want to ask either Leah or Murph questions. And I'm happy if people are, excuse me, if people are interested, I'm happy to send the presentations to you. Maybe I'll send it to the full EPP so you have it. I also wanted to mention that MAP is running a Housing in 4 Parts webinar series that starts next week, right, Leah? Next Wednesday. So that's something that you also may want to take advantage of. Some of the material that that Leah presented today will be in that, but there's going to be a whole lot more focusing on housing. Any questions from folks? I see that Katie joined us late and Maritala as well. Alyssa, yep, I'll send out the slide decks. If Murph, if you can email that to me, that'd be great.
Sounds good.
Anything else? All right, Nolan, I see, are you still here? Nolan came late. Nolan is moving into the chair role for EPP, so we hope you all stay involved. In February, we will have, what are we doing in February? I sent it out and now is that the coffee chat or is that?
I think it's our let's plan for the next one, I think.
Yeah.
We didn't do coffee chat for the winter, so.
Yeah. So we will keep sending those bulletins to you. Stay engaged. It's great to see everybody. Any last thoughts? Nolan, Jada?
I just want to thank Leah and Murph and Nolan. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to thank Leah and Murph for joining us today and giving us those great presentations. I know I want to see Leah's presentation. I probably have access to Murph's presentation already, but I definitely want to see and have Leah's presentation to look back over some of the things you shared too. So thanks.
And I actually just reminded myself, we do have a coffee chat on February 8th.
Okay.
At 9 o'clock, that's a Wednesday. So just informal conversations, feel free to come and go. And then for those of you who are interested in AICP, I have a little Q&A that's scheduled for Friday the 20th. So if you're interested in that, let me know and I'll send you the link. So great. Thank you all. This was really, really well done. Thank you, Leah and Murph. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. This is great. I appreciate it.
Great. Okay.
Thank you. And I will say, like, the league is a member organization of local governments. So all you local government types, do call me with your questions and asks for help, because it's what we're here for.
Great. Okay,
Thank
everybody. Onward, finish up your week. Have a great time, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you again.
Thank
Bye.
you.